SBIR-STTR basics. And then the second half, we'll do some Q&A for that portion. And then the second half, we're going to have Dr. Eric Jukowitz, who's an associate professor of health services, policy and practice at Brown and co-founder of a recent startup called Plans for Care that's developing digital platforms for developing on-demand personalized dementia care. And he recently received an SBIR and is going to talk about his journey to getting that grant and some of the things he's had to deal with now since getting the grant. So with that, if you have any questions as we go along, please put them either in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll be monitoring both. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Pollard to start.
All right. Thank you guys for having me here today. I'm excited to talk with you. Just a little bit more kind of on my background, but kind of on my story, how I got here. You know, like all you formally trained PhD scientists, you know, thought I was going to go into academia. I was going to run a lab. I was postdocing at University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I saw my PI struggling to get grant funds. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm out of here. I can't do this. I don't have the patience for this. I'm not going to struggle to be able to pay myself in my lab with grants. And so I bailed and I went into industry thinking that's where all the money is, naively as a postdoc. So I got a job out of a startup that was a spin out of North Carolina State University. And about 2 weeks into my job, my boss said, you have to get the phase 2 SBIR grant to keep your job for a long term. So I discovered a few things there. First of all, grants are just not in academia. I met Eva Garland. She was my boss at that company. And then over the course of 5 years at that company, Agile Sciences, I was able to bring in about $12 million from the SBIRsSTTR program, some foundation funding, and some contract funding from NIAID at NIH to be able to support early stage R&D efforts at that company. So I didn't get away from grants, as you can see, but I've actually learned to love and embrace grants. And over that time at Agile Sciences, and then I since transferred to Eva Garland Consulting when she started this company and had left Agile Sciences. I've really learned the ins and outs of the SBIRsSTTR funding and how to support an R&D program at a small business. So today I want to talk to you kind of about getting ready for it, like trying to decide, all right, number one, are you eligible? There's SBIRsSTTR, what are those differences? Agency-specific considerations, because there's many agencies that participate within the SBIRsSTTR program. And then kind of getting a sense of, once you have all that under your belt, are you ready? What goes into an application and preparation for that? So your first question, are you eligible? So just some kind of key eligibility requirements. You need to have a small business or a small business concern founded prior to submitting the application. Has to be located within the US and has to be for profit and fewer than 500 employees. It has to be 50% US owned or greater than 50% US owned. And then it has to have less than 50% equity ownership by VCs. And this rule actually varies per institute. NIH in the last few years changed this to having it to be not one single VC being more than 50%, but you can have a combination of. So you'll just kind of have to check your agency to know which rule do they adhere by. And then there's also a slew of registrations that you have to have in place to be able to apply, and we'll touch on those in a little bit. So if you're able to check all your boxes here, you've got your company set up, you adhere to all these requirements, then hopefully you're at least eligible. So then you have to think about, do I do an SBIR or an STTR? So first we're going to touch on an SBIR, or a Small Business Innovation Research Grant. So the main differences that you'll see with these are about budget, and for some of them where the PI can have their position. So the budget's the main thing. So for an SBIR, you have to have at least 67% of the budget for a phase 1 has to go to the small business concern. And then for phase 2, this is typically at least 50% because they realize that a lot more outsourcing of your work is going to be done likely for a phase 2. So that 67% is of, if you have a multi-year project, it has to be each year has to meet that 67% requirement. Also for an SBIR, the PI has to be majority employed by the small business. And this doesn't mean they have to have at least that much time on that grant. Just they have to be employed by it, but they could still have 10% effort on the grant. In contrast with an STTR, or Small Business Tech Transfer Grant, this one requires a collaboration with a partnering research institution, a nonprofit. So this is typically a university, but there are other flavors of this. There are some federally funded labs and some other domestic nonprofit research institutions that you can have as part of this. But typically you see a university filling this role. You can also have a university on SBIR. It's just they can't, you still have to have that 67% for the small business. So they're only working with that extra on that. Whereas with the STTR, you have to have that, you're required to have that research institution on there. They have to get at least 30% of the budget. And a small business concern has to have at least 40% of the budget, and that extra 30 can go either way, as long as you're meeting the 40 and 30 that's required. Additionally, for the STTR, some of the agencies, primarily the Department of Energy and NIH, will allow the PI to actually be at the university. So this is great when you're a professor and you still have to be primarily employed by the university, and you can really be steering that project still from your lab. So you can go the STTR route where you can be PI of that project. If you're submitting to NIH or Department of Energy, get at least 30% of the budget for your lab, have at least 40% going to the small business, but it allows you to still be in your position at the university. Otherwise, what I see a lot of times are you might have a postdoc that's getting ready to, leave your lab or, take on another role, or a very senior grad student that's getting ready to graduate too, where a lot of times we'll see those individuals, if you have to go the SBIR route, kind of fill those roles, or other scientists that might be in your network. So as you're trying to decide whether you're going to do an SBIRsTTR, there's kind of three things you need to think about. Where is the PI? And of course, what does the agency allow for the PI to be at employment status wise? Also, the budget is a very important thing. If you can fit into the 67% going the SBIR route, or if you need to have more going to university, of course, doing the STTR route. And another thing to keep in mind is not every agency actually is in the STTR program. So all the agencies listed here are the ones that participate in the general SBIRsTTR program, but only the ones with the larger budgets have to also be in the STTR program. So you can see here that that's a consideration also as you're trying to think of which one that you should go for. So a little bit more about the agencies then, and what you should be thinking about in addition to whether or not they're in the SBIR and STTR program. Deadlines. Deadlines are, of course, very important because you have to meet these deadlines in order to submit that application. And I'll talk about a few coming up, but in general, they all keep the same deadlines. Each year, you'll see a little bit of movement on this. So you can get familiar with the agencies that are appropriate for your technology, and then keep an eye on what their typical calendar is for releasing their opportunities. You go to, each of them have their own websites for SBIRsTTR program, but there's also that website at the bottom there, the general SBIR.gov website that has the solicitations also for each agency. So just to hit on a few of the main ones quickly. So NIH is one of the top 3 funding wise for size of budget. So for the NIH, they have an omnibus grant solicitation each year, and there's 3 deadlines for this each year. January 5th is one that's coming up soon. Then we have April 5th and September 5th. They also have 1 contract solicitation a year that is typically due kind of in the November timeframe. And then there's also targeted solicitation. So with NIH, it's great. They have this omnibus. As long as you can submit something that is going to be of interest to the 27 institutes and centers that participate, then you're able to submit an application based on kind of their mission, their topic areas, which are very general. The contracts are more targeted and have really more specific technologies and topic areas we're looking for. And that's the same with the targeted solicitations, where they're more specific and you really have to fit those, and you just kind of have to be on the watch for those since they do vary for when they're released. The NSF prides themselves in taking any science, and they're generally say that they're more basic science than compared to NIH. They still have topic areas, and their topic areas are similar to the institutes. But they also have an other topic area. And that's what they love, that anyone can bring them something, an innovative idea for a new product. And if you don't think you fit in one of their topic areas, then you go to the other one. Their submission cycles are different in the sense they have windows as opposed to hard deadlines. So they have typically 3 windows a year. Since they started the windows, these windows have kind of varied a little bit, but typically you'll have one that's from the beginning of the year till about early March. Another window opens right away and goes till July, and then another window opens and goes till about November. But you will see these move a little bit. So you can submit anytime during those open windows for a full application. But before you do a full application, you have to get an invitation for one. So they have this project pitch process. It's roughly about 3 pages, but you upload it into text boxes in an online portal. And it just is a overview of your technology, what your plans are for the application. And you get an invite or a rejection, typically an invite though, based on that project pitch in about anywhere from 2 days to 3 weeks. And then at that point, you have up to a year to submit your full application in one of those windows. Project pitches though can be submitted any day of the year. There's no restriction on those. For Department of Defense, very unlike NIH and NSF that have these kind of open topic areas and bring us your good science, DoD is going to tell you exactly what they want from you. So their solicitations are going to be very specific. They're going to pretty much tell you what your technical objectives should be and what your outcomes should be. So you really need to fit exactly with what they're asking for. They have 3 solicitations a year. And for them, it's pretty much, like I said, aligning appropriately with what they're listing. And also really networking with them to be able to have it so that your technology is fitting within some of these solicitations that they're putting out there. Department of Energy, they have 2 a year. Something that's unique about them that's kind of like NSF is that you do require a letter of intent. There isn't an acceptance or rejection associated with that. It's just kind of to give them a heads up, and it is required 6 weeks before the application. They're also fairly targeted solicitations, so you need to make sure that you're well aligned with what the topic is that's listed. All right, so for all the solicitations for these agencies and more, there's various places to go search for these. As I mentioned, they all kind of have their own sites. You've got the SBIR.gov site, and then grants.gov is a great place to search for different SBIRsSTTR funding. But whenever you do identify a solicitation that you think that you're aligned with, there's a few things that you should check right away. Check the eligibility, make sure there isn't something that's different than what I discussed earlier in the presentation. Some of them, especially the Department of Defense ones, might have a technology readiness level that you must adhere to. And they'll have these defined where they, want to be a little bit further than a prototype stage or whatever it is that they want you to have completed. Just make sure that you're a good fit for that. Budget restrictions. Of course, you need to make sure whatever you need to get done to match that solicitation can be done within the budget constraints. And all the agencies have different budget caps for their different SBIRsSTTRs. Then also the deadline, making sure you're able to get your application together in time and a competitive application for that deadline. All right, and speaking of application preparation, I just want to hit on a few things that are, I want you to consider more as, again, you're still assessing if you're ready for an SBIRsSTTR and kind of getting the early work done. So completing registrations, setting the scope of the project so you get an idea of what can you fit in those budget requirements and the project period. Talking to program officers once you have that set to get some feedback, making sure you understand the review criteria so you can check those boxes as you're putting the application together, getting an idea of what goes into the grant application and realizing this is a time commitment. This isn't done in a weekend. So registrations are going to vary a little bit depending on who you're going to submit to. The top 3 listed here, the System for Award Management or SAM, grants.gov, and the Small Business Administration or SBA, those are typically required for all applications, especially SAM. And SAM can be a monster. So it can happen quickly in, we'll say 3 weeks, or it can take up to 6 weeks or more. It's really hard to know if it's going to go smoothly or not. I don't know why the stars align sometimes and why they don't other times. Some of it's obvious. It's based on changing names and whether or not you're located in an incubator space, but other times SAM just rears this ugly head and you don't know why. So starting SAM early is the key, and then making sure you're staying on top of the progress of getting that registration in place. Grants.gov and SBA are quick ones, and then agency specific. These ones are typically more around the submission system. So they're always a rapid turnaround for these also, but they're required so that you're actually able to submit the application. Next is thinking about your project scope. So to determine whether or not you're ready for an SBIR, you have to think, if I'm going for phase 1 NIH, I'm going to have about $300,000 in about 12 months. Does that going to let me get to the next milestone? And I also starting from a place that is appropriate for a phase 1 application. So, for a phase 1 application, you don't want to be at a concept stage. You're going to want to have something that's de-risked. So at least some kind of in vitro assessments or some testing that you've shown, benchtop testing that this is feasible. You have proof of feasibility. So phase 1 typically isn't going to take you from that to more of a proof of concept stage. And of course, that's going to look different depending on what your technology is, whether it's the drug, so you want to get to, in vivo studies, or if it's something for an ag application, then maybe you're going to do some field testing. If it's a device, there's some type of validation for that device. But typically that's the project that you're looking for, where it's that proof of concept that's going to allow you to get to a stage to where it's working, and maybe there's some refinements after that, but you met that big milestone. So that's typically what they're going to look for a phase 1 SBIRsSTTR. So as you're thinking about this project that could fit within that year-ish, some of them are 6 months depending on the agency, think about what are your aims or your objectives that you wish to accomplish, and you guys are familiar with academic grants, same idea. So these aims are going to be more focused on product development. So you don't want it to sound as exploratory. You want it to be to validate prototype X, to achieve in vivo proof of concept, very product development focused aims. And within these, getting a sense of metrics too, with academic grants, you're talking a lot about testing hypotheses and expected outcomes. For these grants, you like to give a reviewer a very clear idea as to what your go, no-go decision is. So you need to achieve an increase in X% of this endpoint to show that, that prototype's working. But they really want to see quantitative metrics of success. So once you get this pulled together, I'm talking half a sheet or a sheet, like a kind of like an aims page, you want to talk to program officers to get some feedback. And keep in mind that not all agencies allow this, and the ones that sometimes don't allow it's more of a timing thing where they have a blackout period. So make sure you're up on those rules for the agency you're applying to. The whole idea of this meeting is introduce the program officer or program director to your technology, present to them the scope of work. And if it is a resubmission, if you've done this before, present it to them how you plan to make changes and to address the reviewer comments. So within this conversation, you're looking for any feedback, any red flags that they might have, just so you can get those incorporated and start building that relationship with that program officer. So as you go into this meeting, make sure you're prepared. So have that draft, provide that to them before of your scope of work so that they can review that and you guys can have a productive meeting. And then also, you might have some questions about the solicitation and expectations. And so having that list of questions ready so you can ask the program officer. Another thing as you're getting ready for an application is to actually go to the end of what's going to happen. And that is the review criteria. And so understanding what the reviewers are looking for, your audience, is key to starting this whole process. Because if you can't check those boxes, or you have to get maybe some other team members or whatever it is in place to check those boxes, you need time to prepare for that so you can write a competitive application. So the review criteria are going to vary some between agencies, but for the most part, they're going to fall somewhere into these buckets, but might be named a different thing. So I'm just going to walk through each of them, just talk about considerations for each review criteria. So for significance, as you're thinking about SBIR readiness, can you just clearly describe the unmet need that you're addressing? And also it's good to put numbers to that. What is the size of the problem? How much money is it costing us? And then what is out there now? You really need to know what the current solutions are, their limitations. That way you can then show your competitive advantage over it and why your solution is going to be improved or enhanced over the current ones. For innovation commercial potential, it kind of falls into the end of that significance where you need to be able to clearly show you the advantage of your product. I've been on study sections where reviewers do a great job of presenting the application. We get ready to open it up for discussion. And the first question is, so what is this? Is it a product? Is it a service? I don't really know what it's supposed to be. You don't want to be that application. So clearly define what it is that your technology is going to be. Like is it going to be a product? I'm providing a service, whatever it is. So that's clear to reviewers. And then making sure is a major advancement and not something, an incremental improvement. This is an SBIR program. They're looking for innovation. They want major changes. And making sure you're benchmarking this against other technologies out there and showing how you're more competitive. So if you don't have a clear idea of that competitive landscape before you start making an application, now's the time to pull that information together and really be able to identify what makes your product different. Also, they'll be looking for some idea of how you're protecting your intellectual property. And depending on what area of science you're in, this might be a little bit different, might be trade secrets and such, but they do like to have you display some plan for protecting your IP, or if you already have a patent file, but providing that information. So those are some things to think about as you get ready for an SBIR. Another thing is team. The team for an academic grant typically is the professor and maybe a collaborator. So you have a smaller team. For an SBIRsSTTR grant, your team typically isn't as much internal to the company because your company is small, but you have consultants you're bringing in. You might still have that academic collaborator, but it takes kind of broader expertise typically for an SBIR application. So making sure you've made those connections and have those people to bring on. So you're going to, of course, have your PI. There might be other people at the company, maybe the regulatory, statistician, some business development people. But all these people can come together in different roles to make that team. And you want to be able to show you have expertise to cover the entire proposed project. In terms of approach, you just pretty much, this is the part that you guys, as academics are going to have the best knowledge about, having those details. Why am I doing something? Having those metrics of success to show that, and those details are going to support the rigor and reproducibility of the application. So this isn't going to differ as much from an academic application, just more, as I already talked about, with the metrics of success and not testing a hypothesis, as this is going to be more objective driven, but making sure you're getting yourself in the mindset and being able to pull things together too, because as you're developing a product, you might not just be doing everything in your lab now. You might have to get a contract research organization or whatever it is and getting those details from them so you're prepared to write the application. And just to note, for a phase 1 SBIRsSTTR, preliminary data is not required, but it's very hard to get an application actually funded without some type of de-risking of the project. So you do typically see preliminary data in these applications, and it's strongly encouraged. For environment, similar to like the team for an academic grant, typically it's going to be your lab and your core facilities at your university. This is going to differ for an SBIRsSTTR. You want to show them, of course, you've got the space to do the work. So for a business, you might be fairly virtual, but you can lean on the fact that you have a sub-award that they're going to have all those facilities to do the work, or a contract research organization. You can list those facilities. Also, you have to keep in mind the intangibles. So this is a business, so you want to show them that you have some business development support. So groups at the university or small business groups outside the university, you can say how you lean on them. You go to webinars, you attend networking events, anything to show that you're building up your business development aspect too. All right, so kind of segueing from here's what you need to address in an application. I'm going to give you an idea of the different parts of the application just briefly. These are going to look a lot like any academic grant that you've done. The only main difference here is a commercialization plan. But the idea here too is just to read the solicitation, program announcement, make sure you understand all the parts that are supposed to be in it. You might have examples that you can grab online. There's definitely for NIH, they have some examples of SBIRsSTTR applications that would be good to look at. And also sometimes in some applications, they have samples or templates of different components. So making sure that you're taking advantage of those. But that, as you can see with all these documents and all this prep work that I've been talking about, it's going to take some time. The SBA actually estimates it takes 100+ hours to prepare a phase 1 SBIRsSTTR. We have a few books that we've published on writing NSF and NIH SBIRsSTTRs. We recommend typically 10 to 12 weeks to get this done, and it does add up to about the hours that SBA has estimated. And you don't have to use our timelines, but I just want to plant the seed that timelines are great. These because these grants aren't just happening all in your lab, there's going to be other moving parts that are more out of your control. You're going to have some waiting for people to get things back to you, maybe a contract research organization quote. You'll have letters of support from key opinion leaders, and these all take time to get. So we have timelines that we set up to where you're working on those long lead items that are more out of your control early on as you're starting to write your research strategy, and then wrapping up with those supporting docs. Take home message here is it takes time. So make sure you're allowing for that time to make a competitive application. So just real quickly to give you an idea of what EDC is. So we're a firm that manages grant funding to support scientific advancements. We have about 40 PhD scientists that work as scientific consultants. We actually have another arm of our company that helps with accounting and compliance. Once you get that award, there's definitely some rules you need to follow and some money to be tracking. On the grant side of things, we help in various ways. One thing we initially do is that we can help you find these grants, and not just find them, but also put them into a strategy as to what would be best to go after first. Could you repurpose this application to go for another solicitation? So we end up generating a Gantt chart that kind of has a timeline and a strategy for how you should approach getting non-dilutive funding. But additionally, as you identify applications, we provide full service and even hourly support for helping write those applications. So for full service, we're planning that timeline. We're getting all the documents together. We're writing documents. It is a very collaborative approach to it because you're the expert in the science and we're the experts in the SBIRsSTTR program. So bringing that together to get a competitive application. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right, I apparently can't come back off video because the hostess disabled it. I don't know what's going on with this webinar. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the, we haven't gotten any yet. All right, we have some hands up. Josh, if you can unmute, you can ask your question.
All right, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. This is really helpful. So I have some experience with this mechanism. I currently have an STTR, but I'm interested in putting in an SBIR for a small business that I have recently spun out. In knowing that the person in the small business has to be on that small business for at least 51%, I'm wondering, how is that measured or how is that quantified, especially for instances where that person that's going to be, in this case, somebody that we have identified to be our CEO for that company, is working primarily for equity right now. And there isn't going to be like pay stubs to show that this person is 51% or more. How do we show that or demonstrate that that person is at least 51% FTE on that entity?
Yeah, so typically just at a time of award, and I should also say this, that's at time of award that all these rules kind of apply. Like you have to have that small business in place, the full time is at time of award. So at time of award, if they ask for proof of that, a lot of times, if you don't have a situation where someone does have pay stubs, it's literally just a letter that kind of says like, here's your, it could be from you if you're the owner saying we're offering you this position as full time. Just kind of an offer letter, but it can be very limited, just to show proof of that person meeting that requirement.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And then Danny, you have your hand up if you have a question. Oh. Nope. All right. All right. Well, I think for timing, we can shift over now. Angie, thank you so much for this presentation. This has been great. If anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to, you can email me or Karen, I think, or anyone on this panel, and we can pass it along and get the answer for you. So thanks again. Appreciate it. And I will shift it over to Eric to take it from here.
All right, cool. Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Juckwitz. I'm an associate professor in the School of Public Health here at Brown, and was asked today to talk about my experience recently submitting and being awarded a fast track SBIR from NIH, and specifically NIA, National Institutes on Aging. Just for background, I actually learned about the SBIR program when I was in graduate school, and I had my advisor at the time had worked on a few SBIRs where he was sort of contracted, or he was the site PI from organizations that were submitting these grants. And the organizations were developing technologies, mostly around the digital health space and aging. My background's in aging also. And they were contracting out with him to do the research. And so I worked on a few SBIRs from the research side and started to kind of just learn about the mechanism. Then when I came here to Brown, I submitted a few SBIRs also where I was sort of partnering with a company and doing the research for them. And I started to learn sort of what worked and didn't work for these mechanisms, what was getting funded and not funded. And I thought it was a really cool mechanism because it was really different than sort of the traditional R01s, R21s that I was applying to. And so I always kind of knew in the back of my mind this was something that I wanted to explore, and I was just waiting for the right opportunity in terms of identifying a technology that would be ready for me to try to commercialize. And so that opportunity happened about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, where I formed a company called Plans for Care with two other academics, where we're working on translating some of their evidence-based research that's been tested in NIH-funded trials. And we're working to translate that and get it out of the university. And so I'll talk today a little bit about my experience navigating key decision points along the way in terms of submitting the SBIR-STTR, how we made those decisions. I think one thing to keep in mind is, and in reflecting to create this presentation, is like, I don't think there's one right or wrong way to approach these decisions. And you really have to think about ultimately what's going to be best for the company, yourself, and your end goals. And so for folks who have submitted SBIRs, STTRs in the past, I'd be interested in hearing how you've thought about these things. And for individuals who are thinking about doing this for the first time, hopefully this will be helpful so that you can just get a head start on thinking about sort of these key issues. I know our group, we're kind of like dealing with these things on the fly and reacting to them, and it would have been a little helpful to have been more proactive instead of reactive, and that and being able to be proactive would have really helped us. So let's see if I can advance. So plan, I'll just quickly talk about what we're doing at Plans for Care, how we're using the SBIR, and then we'll go through the key decision points we had to make along the way. The first was like, do we want to go for federal funding, SBIR, STTR, or private funding, and sort of what was our decision points there. The next decision point we had to navigate was like, are we a phase 1, phase 2, or fast track application? And then we had to decide between whether we want to do the SBIR or STTR award. There's a number of challenges also along these decision points, and I'll kind of comment on a few of them. The first is related to all the forms and paperwork, and you kind of heard about that in the previous presentation. Those challenges are real and really affected our timeline, especially registrations around SAM.gov and ERA comments. Probably the biggest challenge we faced, and that I hear from other sort of academics and sort of similar shoes as myself, is this 51% rule for the SBIRs, and we'll talk about how we navigated that in our case. Other challenges are around managing your effort. One thing that we as a group were really concerned about, and I hear this from other people as well, is like, how do you deal with employee benefits, including health insurance, 401k, and we spent as a team a lot of time like worrying about that and thinking about how we would hire somebody and deal with this issue. And one thing we did learn is if you have money, getting health insurance, setting up a 401k is super easy. So I would say don't worry about that. And then the last thing that we spent a lot of time debating is around the fee and indirect rates that we would charge. Ultimately, we received guidance from a number of people that you should just go with the standard fee, standard indirect rate. And in the case of NIH and NIA, that's published. And so we did that. We've heard that other people have tried to do lower fees, lower indirect rates to make their proposals look more competitive. And in the end of the day, that doesn't help your proposal, and it actually will hurt you in the back end. So advice we got, and that I'll just share with you, is always take the fee and the standard indirect rate. What I'm talking about is mostly my experience, again, applying to NIA, and mostly around like a digital health type solution or software. Some of the things I'm talking about might be different if you're applying to a different funding agency, a different institute, or if you're trying to commercialize a different type of product like a therapeutic or medical device. So context matters. So our company's Plans for Care, we provide personalized dementia care on demand. 75% of dementia care is provided by family members or family caregivers, and they encounter a number of care challenges that, if left unaddressed, lead to disease progression, poor outcomes, including increased healthcare utilization. And so what our team has done is we've created a database of more than 85 common caregiver challenges based on our research. So these are things like, my mom is agitated. I can't get my wife to take a shower. It's been like 3 weeks since she's bathed. My brother with dementia continually tries to wander and leave the home. So we have 85 of these care challenges. We have over 1,500 non-drug evidence-based strategies to address the care challenges. And we have a clinical algorithm that takes in information about the person with dementia's cognition, their home environment, and the characteristics of the caregiver to build out a personalized care plan. And so even though 2 people might have the same care challenge, for example, I'm having challenges around dressing in the morning. They could have very different care plans based on their answers to the assessment questions. And so that's our core technology, is this database that generates a tailored care plan. We submitted an SBIR fast track, and we'll talk about the funding mechanisms or award types in a bit, but a fast track basically incorporates phase 1 and phase 2 in the award at the same time. And so in phase 1, we are phase 1, aim 1, we're developing a prototype. And then in phase 1, aim 2, we're determining feasibility, acceptability, and usability. So you can tell, and again, based on the previous presentation, these grants are really all about research and development of a technology. So slight shift from if you're submitting like an R01 or an R21 from the research side of things, which have, I would say, slightly more complicated hypotheses and slightly more complicated aims. Here, it's just about development and do people like it? So phase 1 is a prototype development. What's nice about the fast track is you propose your own milestones. And if you meet those milestones, then you get to go to phase 2, which is a bigger budget and a longer award period. And so in phase 2, we'll be completing the build out of our tool and then testing it in a trial. So before kind of talking about the particulars of the SBIR, it's helpful to take a step back, and we heard a little bit about this in the previous presentation, but there's a couple of like pre-steps or the pre-SBIR stage. And this is really forming your company, working with tech transfer. For us in the university, working with, I forget the specific office, but they help form a financial conflict of interest plan. And registering your company with various state entities in the federal government. And all these things, as you heard, take time. That's not an understatement. Our team had finished writing our grant. We were ready to submit it in for a September deadline. And we couldn't finish all these registration steps. It was taking too long for SAMS.gov to get back to us. We were still working out conflict of interest material, and we actually had to delay our submission till the January cycle. So something that's real, something that's important, and you have to spend time on it. The SBIR phase is what we'll go through next. I just want to note also that for any of these phases, you can outsource a lot of the work, or you can do it yourself. If you're doing it yourself, you have to be ready to invest time. And if you outsource it, you have to be willing to invest, financial resources. And we tried to strike a balance in terms of what we were doing ourselves versus getting other people to do. We really tried to outsource a lot of the process-oriented stuff around registrations, which take a lot of time for us to learn, but could easily be done by somebody else. While we focused as a group on our core strengths, which was writing the grant, the business model around the grant, and sort of all the science. So you register your company, and the first question that we asked ourselves is, we need money. Should we do an SBIR-STTR or get private funding? And we wanted to think about what are the pros and cons of these. The major advantages of the SBIR is non-dilutive capital. You don't give up equity, and really important to us is you maintain 100% control. We wouldn't have outside investors to respond to, and as an early stage, really risky company, there's a good chance what we're doing doesn't pan out. And if that's the case, that's okay. But what we want to be able to do at the end of the day is then take that back to the university side and continue to do research on it. And our concern was if we got private money, it would be a lot harder to continue to work on our technology and solution from a research perspective. And we'd have to continually try to commercialize it, even if it wasn't sort of ready for it. And so SBIR and the control it provided for us as a team was really valuable. The other valuable thing for us is that, we're academics. We know how to write grants. I've been involved, again, in a number of SBIRs. I saw what worked, what didn't work. One of our co-founders has a textbook on grant writing. So, we felt really comfortable with grant writing and being able to put something together for the SBIR mechanism. And I think this is a real strength of those in the group here, and wouldn't underestimate that. I've talked to a number of sort of friends, colleagues who have small businesses in the aging tech space, similar to us, similar to myself. They don't come from an academic background, and they've tried to submit SBIRs, STTRs, and they've really had a hard time just because they don't know how to write grants. So this was a major advantage for us. The key consideration or challenges, and we'll talk about this in a bit, is this 51% rule at the company if you're doing an SBIR, and being able to find somebody to fill that role. Other considerations, if you're doing a phase 1 award, that's a short period of time, between 6 and 18 months, I think generally, relatively small budget. And so if you do a phase 1 award, you're going to have to be submitting another grant right away, or figuring out how you're going to get additional funding, because you're going to face a cliff. And so that's a major concern, and something we spent a lot of time thinking about, and ultimately factored into deciding on the fast track award, which I'll provide more context in a bit. And then the other thing that people say, although I'm not sure 100% agree with this, is that SBIRs, STTRs, they're great. They give you non-dilutive capital, but it results in a slower development timeline and potentially longer time to market. And maybe all else equal, if you got SBIR money and private money at the same exact time, it would take longer to go to market with the SBIR money than the private money. But again, in talking to people in the field and on the business side of things in aging tech, it can take as long or maybe longer to get private money as it does to get SBIR money. And so if you can get that SBIR money faster than private money, I'm not sure sort of this argument of slower development, longer time to market exists. For private money, the big advantage is, again, potentially faster time to market if you get that money quick enough. And then the other major advantage of the private money that we saw was they can open up doors and make connections that you're not going to get through SBIR. SBIR STTRs are great. They give you credibility with the by having government funding. Investors, people in the community like to see it, but people aren't necessarily coming to you just because you have an SBIR or STTR. With private money and the right investor, they are introducing you to people and helping create sales, and it's more of a direct a benefit. So that's something you miss out on. But again, the major consideration that we thought about was giving up some control. So our decision was, and thought process in this was like, we know how to write grants, and we think we can write a half decent SBIR. We know we're risky, and we don't want to give up a lot of control in exchange for the money we need to develop this. And finding the right investor, I think we thought would take time. We had somebody who could be an MPI on the grant and fulfill that 51% sort of requirement. And so we decided on going the SBIR-STTR route. So the next decision point is, do we do a phase 1, phase 2 fast track award? Phase 1's short period of time, 6 to 16 months, depending on the funding agency, less funding. And the way we looked at this is, if we did a phase 1, we'd have to be applying for another phase 1 the same time we got the notice of award, or the phase 2 right away. And if you don't get that next award, you're going to have a funding cliff and have to figure out how to pay for your employee. We had a unique opportunity again where we had a individual who could fulfill the 51% requirement or be a full-time employee on the company side. And our concern was, if we had this funding cliff and then that individual leaves, we won't be able to apply for our next SBIR. And so that was a major concern for us, and it's a concern I hear from other people as well. Phase 2 awards are full-scale research and development, seen as a continuation of phase 1 work. They have longer timelines, to 3 years, maybe 4 years, depending on the agency, and more funding. What's interesting about the phase 2 awards is they require a commercialization plan that's included in the application. So this is in addition to your 12 pages of research strategy, in addition to the aims. The commercialization plan is supposed to be reviewed as part of the approach. We found that the reviewers, who are mostly, I think, from an academic background, didn't really look at the commercialization plan and didn't really comment on it. But you still have to be ready to do it. We spent a lot of time writing it up. I think at the end of the day, we did a good job, but we didn't. No one may have read it. So just something to keep in mind. You need to have that in place. Fast track is what we ultimately decided on. It's nice in that it's a single proposal for phase 1 and phase 2, so it avoids the funding gap. It has a longer sort of timeline. So we have the phase 1 timeline, which is 12 months. Then we're going to phase 2, hopefully, if we meet our milestones, which is 3 years. And you get a bigger budget for being both of phase 1 and phase 2. The thing for the fast track is you really need good preliminary data to support that award. Something unique to, I think, only NIH is they have a phase 2B award. My understanding is these are more for probably therapeutics that require a significant amount of additional funding to advance their work. So our thought process was, we're working on commercializing NIH-funded research that our team's been involved in, and taking that from an academic setting into something that's more scalable. So we felt we had strong preliminary data. We had talked to a number of program officers and other individuals in our network who had actually received SBIRs and received guidance that our aims read like a fast track award. So that was good. We were really concerned about the phase 1 funding cliff and what that meant. And we didn't want the pressure of having to, as soon as we submit this thing, as soon as we get this award, have to submit something else and hope things go well. And in our case, where we're doing a digital health solution, our fast track award, we think, is going to provide enough funding to actually also commercially launch at the same time. And we're actually considering whether or not private funding is even needed now for what we need to do. So ultimately, we decided on the fast track. So we're down this path of we want to do the government funding route. We chose a fast track. we had to decide whether or not to do an SBIR or STTR. We spent a lot of time on this decision, and really the key driver of why we spent time on this decision was about this 51% rule, where if you have an SBIR, your employee must be, the PI must be at least 51% employed by the business. And this represented a major challenge. Who's going to be this employee? Where do we find them? We thought whether or not it could be one of us as a faculty person, but that meant giving up some of our time at the university side. We went back and forth while we tried to figure out whether or not we could find somebody to be 51% employees. Some weeks we felt like we'll just go the STTR route. Other weeks we're like, we want to make it work with the SBIR. Ultimately, what drove our decision was we found somebody who could be this employee, and she was a postdoc in one of our founding members' labs. And after talking to a bunch of people, it seems like a really common pathway is for those in an academic setting trying to commercialize research, having a postdoc or a PhD student who's graduating and is interested in sort of a career in sort of industry or in the startup worlds serves as a really good model for having that person be the 51% or greater than 51% employee. But it's a real challenge, especially for people from the university side. Just want to give a sense of budget breakdown, because although the money is nice, you spend it pretty quickly. So for an SBIR phase 1, a total cost of $500,000, which is the budget cap for people doing Alzheimer's disease related research. If you're not doing Alzheimer's disease related research, the total budget cap is actually less than that. These are total costs, so you don't get indirects on top of this. This is everything, $500,000. So after you take out the fee and the 40% indirect, which is what NIH says you can do for the small business, you're left with total available direct costs of about $333,000 and a minimum total company budget of $335,000. So this money goes pretty quick, especially if you hire at least one person, and you need to hire one person. I kind of estimated that for about every dollar spent on direct costs, you spend probably 30 cents to 35 cents on indirects in terms of taxes, benefits, etc. So the money goes pretty quick. And you really have to be careful about sort of how you think about allocating this. And this was actually one of the other driving factors for why we wanted to go the SBIR versus STTR route. When we did the breakout for the budgets by SBIR, STTR, for the STTR, a lot of money was going to the university side, but because they're total cost awards, a lot of that budget for the university side was being eaten up by indirects. And so when you have a company, had a sort of change in perspective on this whole thing, and was thinking, why would we want to give an award to the university where 60% of their budget is going to overhead and not actually advancing the work of the company? And so that's why we worked really hard actually to try to figure out and make the SBIR route work. The other key driving factor for us was we were able to find obviously somebody to serve as a full-time employee. So there's, again, a couple of options for thinking about this 51% problem. The first that we considered as a group was one of the founding members, who are all faculty at different universities, becomes a part-time employee at the university and a part-time employee at their company. We were seriously considering this. The biggest benefit is, right, you have more time to work on the company, direct oversight of the grant. Our biggest concern was, again, we're, being realistic, we're a high risk, early stage company. There's a chance this doesn't work out. And our concern was, if it doesn't work out, we need to go back to the university. That's fine, but it might be harder, and it will take time to build up our funding back on the university side. And that would affect us in terms of our benefits, salaries, long term. So not something anybody was willing to sort of accept. The other option that we went with was being able to find a trusted postdoc who could take on the role of being MPI. The big thing here is you really have to have trust in that person, and you don't want to just find anybody off the street. One of the things we did to help maintain control of the award is I actually serve as MPI on this grant, and I receive, and I'm MPI on the company side. So I actually receive effort on this grant from the company, and I'm involved in a lot of the day-to-day and helping manage oversight. Our postdoc, former postdoc, who's now full-time at the company, she's great, but this is her first NIH award, and she doesn't have experience managing budgets, corresponding with NIH. And so we thought it was important for one of the more experienced academics on the team to also be high-level control of the grant. And the way we set that up was through an MPI relationship. I'm only 10% on the grant from the company side, but I still, because I'm MPI, have now direct oversight of the grant and correspondence with NIH, and that is something that was important to everybody. I know we're kind of nearing time, so just kind of want to end on two other slides. One is managing effort and just things to consider. There's a couple of ways you can set up these grants. I take effort on the grant through the company, which presents a number of challenges for managing the other support page, and effort between the company and my effort on NIH grants at the university. You might have to have like a whole separate conversation about how to manage these efforts and how to manage your other support pages. I was able to figure out a way to do it that worked for me, but I don't know how generalizable my experience will be, and happy to kind of in a separate conversation talk about that. The other thing we've done is for the other co-founders of the company, we've established subawards with their university. Those co-founders are actually now responsible for carrying out the research aims of the grant. And so the company has a subaward with their university. The co-founders are receiving effort through the grant as subawardees, site PIs, and they're responsible for carrying out the research aims. They don't receive any salary or effort from the company side, but because they're getting paid through the grant, they still maintain meaningful involvement in company activities. And this was something that worked well for us. The third option was no one from the co-founding team takes any effort on the grant or no salary from the company. So we only provide in-kind support or just make it someone else's problem, which at times felt like a nice thing. Our concern was like, we're giving up complete control, and that's not something we want to do. And even though this is our company that we co-founded, having some salary support, either directly or indirectly, I think really helps in terms of keeping people engaged and is important. So I'll just end with a couple of resources that I found helpful. Rhode Island, although we're small, I think has a lot of resources for early stage startups, especially coming out of the university setting. For life science organizations, people in life sciences, NEMIC was a really helpful group for us. Commerce Rhode Island, also powerful group for us. They provide matching funds. Brown and the tech transfer office, Melissa and her team, really helpful in making connections. So even though we're a small state, I think we actually have a lot of resources that are available to us. And it seems like less competition among startups just because there's not a lot of us. When I've talked to people in other states that are bigger or more active startup space, it's harder for them actually to gain access to resources just because there's more of them. So we're a little over time. sorry about that. Happy to answer questions. Have some questions up here for the group as well, and also available offline to follow up with people and answer specific questions and talk about things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I know we've gone over time, but if there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. No. All right. Oh, okay, Robert, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So, okay, my first question was answered, actually. I put a couple in the chat. But the second question, you know, here you developed an invention product, and you know, the question is, because you're a Brown faculty member, did Brown claim any IT rights to your invention that you know, submitted for the SBIRsSTTR? Or is it wholly owned by the company or whoever did the patent?
Yeah, in our case, the IP is wholly owned by the company. We have you know, every situation is going to be unique, has its own context. So in our case, everything is owned by the company. I can talk more about it with you one-on-one later if you want. But we worked with Melissa Tech Transfer to kind of establish that before we submitted the SBIR-STTR.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions, thank you all for attending, and thank you so much to our panelists. So as Trish put in the chat, we will have this recording available. So if you know of others who wanted to attend but couldn't attend, please feel free to share the recording, and we will hopefully see you all back in person in February for our next faculty entrepreneur session. So happy holidays and thanks for attending.